majority of the issues airborne? Like, is it dust related?
Yes, definitely. Biggest path of exposure for many of these hazardous contaminants is definitely through inhalation.
In this podcast, Taryn Toic talks about specialized industrial hygiene and handling hazardous materials on construction sites.
Industrial hygiene is a field based on anticipating, recognizing, evaluating, and controlling exposures in workplaces. There definitely needs to be a lot of awareness for trades as to where they can encounter asbestos, lead, and silica, and just awareness of what types of materials that can be in. A lot of people don't want to wear a respirator all the time. It's not comfortable.
And it's hot. I mean, it's like 35 degrees here at the moment. It's disgusting.
Oh, wow, really?
Taryn, welcome to the Siteshed podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tuning in all the way from sunny Vancouver.
Yep, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
Snowed in. All good.
Yes, we have received a large dump of snow this morning, and when that happens, our city pretty much shuts down.
Yeah, I know, it's hilarious. You'd think by now they'd be used to it, right?
You would think
it's the same in Toronto, it's the same in New York. Whenever there's snow, the place just goes to hell.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're here today to talk a little bit about handling of hazardous materials on site. I suppose in the construction space, you're a industrial hygienist. Maybe you can give us a bit of insight as to what that is and what you do.
Sure. As there definitely tends to be some confusion based on the title. I think most people have only heard that term when they go to their dentist and have their dental hygienist give them a cleaning. So
right.
It's different than that, but I do hear that quite often. So industrial hygiene is a field based on anticipating, recognizing, evaluating, and controlling exposures in workplaces. This can be anything. There could be chemical exposures, physical, biological, or ergonomic exposures as well. Things like vapors, fumes, dust, heat, noise, vibration, mold, repetitive tasks, movements, probably some things your audience is quite familiar with. Also, super relevant to trades would be noise, asbestos, silica dust, and lead, probably.
Yeah, sure. It's one of those things where, like, I formerly came out of the plumbing game, when I growing up, and we would come across asbestos in walls all the time, and just not really think a whole lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even back then. The guys that we were working with, the older guys, who were probably like my age, which seemed ancient back then, but I was like, oh, when we were kids, we'd like pour these asbestos into a big bucket, and a big cloud of it would pop up, and then mix it with water, and then gradually, piece by piece, all these things come on the spectrum, right? And now, like, there's this whole silicosis, which is like crazy, and I mean, what's next? Who knows? So,
right, and like you said, depending on what you're doing, the building that you're working on might not be your primary focus, right? If you're plumbing and you're focusing on the pipes inside the building, you might not be thinking about drywall and what other hazards you might be exposed to within the building itself. So I think there definitely needs to be a lot of awareness for trades as to where they can encounter asbestos, lead, and silica, and just awareness of what types of materials that can be in. So as industrial hygienists, we often go out to sites and conduct air monitoring and exposure assessments, and we figure out the levels of what exposures people are being exposed to at their workplace. We recommend various controls to help them mitigate or eliminate, ideally, their exposures if possible. And then sometimes we also do confirmation sampling to see if the controls are effective.
Yeah, I guess sound's one I never really thought about. I mean, it's very hard to find a silent jackhammer.
Yeah, noise is a huge issue in many trades and construction industry as well.
I guess there's that fine line as well from a management perspective, where you obviously got to mitigate your exposure to these to sound, but then you also need to make sure that people can hear what's going on.
That's always tricky, and I think that's why PPE, personal protective equipment, is always the last line of defense, because how many times have you been at a site where people are wearing hearing protection, but they remove it and lean close so they can speak with one another, right? So
Right.
that's where definitely having the hierarchy of controls, having engineering or elimination and administrative procedures in place really can help to mitigate those things.
So would you say this conversation is typically more focused towards like the bigger commercial sort of style of development and construction, or does it apply to basically anyone who's running a business where there's potential exposure?
So I know in British Columbia, and I'm not incredibly familiar with New Zealand regulations, but I imagine it's pretty similar.
We're in Australia. It's all right. You
Oh,
Americans always screw that up.
very funny. I see what you did there. Sorry, Australia. Then I think we're even more similar to Australian regulations. But as a building owner, if you suspect that you might have asbestos containing materials, you are required to have an asbestos inventory. So workers in your building can refer to that inventory before they disturb any materials and see what is present. So that's something that we do is we'll go to sites and collect physical samples of building materials, send them to the lab, and help clients or building owners to develop an inventory that they can refer to in the event of any renovations or demolitions in the future.
Right. Okay. So, but I mean, how would that look for someone who's just renovating their house? Like, they're not going to call an industrial hygienist to do samples, are they? They're going to get an
In
excavator and knock it down and just.
in yes, that is definitely an issue as well. But in British Columbia here, you are required to have a qualified person for residential come to your house and do an assessment as well. So it could be someone like an industrial hygienist who would come and do that. In our consulting firm, we typically don't do residential, but yeah, they are required to have a proper assessment done. And recently as well in BC here, just as of January 1st, all asbestos abatement contractors also must be licensed, and anyone performing any asbestos work in relation to buildings must be certified. So that's new for us, and I think that's a huge step going forward, is having those licenses and certifications in place
So
to
they didn't have to be
prevent.
certified before?
There wasn't an official certification process, no.
Wow. Yeah, they're pretty
Yes.
ruthless of that here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. So yeah, I think that's a big step to preventing what you said, like people doing demolition in the middle of the night and trying to dump their materials somewhere and not do things properly. So that's something for us that is a big stride.
It's funny, I've got this written on my board because a mate of mine, Jason's in this asbestos removal game, and he's been on the show a number of times, but he was telling me that like 90% of homes built before 1990 in Australia were containers.
Wow. Yeah. It's
And they're the ones that are
we're
getting renovated, right? Because they're like, guys, you know, it's time.
yeah,
Let's
and
update this
and we
thing.
see it in like not just residential, but in our other clients, older buildings, like you're saying, commercial buildings too. Um, Utility providers have a lot of old sites with electrical equipment that is very old, and the building themselves is also very old. So when anything like that gets updated, they are required to do a survey as well, and then the abatement contractors that are going in are required to have safe work procedures and exposure control plans, and
Yeah.
really mitigate their exposure and remove everything properly.
So, what about some practical, I suppose, advice on the guys out there that are, like a smaller business, but still want to make sure that their team's safe when they, when they're on site? What are some of the main things they should be considering?
I think like learning asbestos awareness. So taking the time, I know there are some small courses out there that people can take, but just really understanding what building materials you might encounter in your everyday life and in your trade specifically. So for example, in plumbing, pipe insulations, parging cements under pipe hangers and shoes, that kind of thing. Just being super aware of what materials to look out for so that when you are in a situation where you might be exposed, you can say something and bring it up to your employer. I think I see quite often too in trades, there's a lot of emergencies, right? Like leaks, floods, there's work that needs to be done right now, and people don't take the time to think about asbestos or lead because the pipe is leaking. We need to turn it off. So just making sure that if you are doing emergency work, that you are protecting yourself using the hierarchy of control. So, it might mean throwing on a respirator or a Tyvek suit if you're not sure. And then once the immediate concern is taken care of, then doing your due diligence to find out if those building materials are containing and how you should proceed. And like you said, even just awareness about when asbestos was used. And, if you're in an older building, if you're doing work somewhere where there are older pieces of equipment that could have asbestos containing wires or things like that is really important.
Sure. Is the management procedures relating to asbestos and silica similar?
Um,
Because
well,
both dust related, right?
yeah. In a way, I would say that the procedures for handling asbestos are much more prescriptive and detailed, also in terms of proper disposal of asbestos. But both are what we would call here ALARA substances, where you want to keep your exposure as low as reasonably achievable. We don't want any exposure, preferably. So I would say the safe work procedures for handling asbestos will be more detailed and specific, and it is based on risk and what your work activity is doing, the friability of the material, right? So there's a difference if you're working with texture coat on a ceiling, which is super friable, versus something maybe like vinyl floor tiles, which is more intact. But yeah, and we do require also each to have an exposure control plan, where employers and contractors can detail how they're going to protect themselves and what they're going to do when they're doing their work. And I know here in BC, we have a industry association called the BC Construction Safety Alliance. They have so many great resources, but they've done something which is create a silica control tool. So they have gone out and collected air samples of various silica tasks using different tools. And they've created an online tool where you can go in and say, I'm doing drywall sanding. This is the attachment I'm using. This is how long I'm doing it for. And it will actually provide an exposure control plan for you. So there are some really neat resources coming out for these procedures.
Is that going to eventually be like at the hands of everyday tradespeople? Like, is that a tool that
This
you're going to be able to go down to the supplier and buy?
This is just an online tool, and it is available right
Oh,
now. Yeah. So anyone, I think you might have to put in your employer number. So it's probably limited to British Columbia at the moment, but anyone can use it, and it will develop a procedure for you, because I think that is a limitation sometimes with hazardous building materials, is having those proper written documents in place. So
sure.
this is a very helpful way to get something like that tailored for your specific job.
Are the majority of the issues airborne? Like, is it dust related?
Yes, definitely. So the biggest path of exposure for many of these hazardous contaminants is definitely through inhalation.
Yeah.
And I think that's another issue, like with silica, depending on how dusty the task is, oftentimes you can see that the air is dusty. Sometimes you can't, though. Sometimes it's so small that you can't see it. But definitely with asbestos, you cannot see it with the naked eye. And once it's disturbed, it can linger in the air for up to 72 hours. So if there's a disturbance to a building material and then that area, for example, is not cordoned off and someone else will go in there not using proper controls, that can be a real problem.
I remember like back in the day, just in a small room, like chasing a wall with just dust everywhere. I mean, we even back then we had like vacuums on it, but it still didn't. The room was just covered in dust. I mean, my lungs are probably riddled with stuff. Who knows? But I mean, it's a hard thing to manage because you need these huge extraction fans, and then you've got to make sure that, I guess, that's being extracted somewhere that's not going to be into a path of someone else, and like it just,
exactly. Yeah, you need to, oftentimes, depending on what the work is, but you need to build a containment and have a HEPA filter, and there's very rigorous controls that are in place. And I think, like, they've made huge strides in controlling asbestos and awareness, but there's still some work to be done. But definitely, I don't run into too many situations like what you're describing in your past. Definitely the safety and control around these hazardous building materials has come a long way. And for lead as well, right? Like lead paint in older buildings, and even lead can be in ceramic tiles in the glaze. So when people are cutting ceramic tiles or demolishing them, there needs to be controls for lead considerations around that as well.
so is that an inhalation issue also, or contact?
That is also primarily an inhalation issue.
Huh. So
Mm-hmm.
lead paint. So if you're removing paint from a wall or whatever, then that could potentially be inhaled, which could lead to something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What
Yes,
could it lead to?
anything.
What's the outcome of lead?
Yeah, so like what you're saying, so any disturbance of, same with like asbestos and items that contain silica, right? So any disturbance, cutting, grinding, sanding, that definitely needs to be controlled. And lead is a common issue that we're seeing quite often. So I think the effects of that can be like neurological issues and
Oh yeah.
things of that nature. So also, with all these hazards we're talking about, the results have a long latency period. So that's another thing I think that people in trades need to be aware of as well, right? Is um, they don't not that they don't take it seriously, but sometimes people think, oh, that's not going to impact me right now, so they might see it 25 or 30 years down the road, when it's too late. So I think because it's not an acute hazard necessarily in this situation, it's not a big cut that you can see, people tend to think about it less.
I guess it becomes one of those scenarios as well where there's like so much, so many things that you need to be aware. Yeah, I mean, it must be one of those things where there's so many issues today with like the guys out there. I mean, okay, we're installing pipe, we're installing lagging, we need to use like mastics and silicons and that kind of things. We've got gaskets with gasket seals and all this kind of stuff. Like, essentially, what are they going to do? Walk around in masks all day? Like, I just think like the reality of it is probably most people just won't.
I know, and that is definitely a limitation within trades and construction, right? Like a lot of people don't want to wear a respirator all the time. It's not comfortable. It's a burden sometimes, right?
And it's hot. I mean, it's like
It's
35
hard.
degrees here at the moment. It's disgusting.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can definitely, it can be heavy on your face, all of those things. So we definitely do try to control it before the PPE level, but even people, specifically in construction and trades, sometimes they don't want to wear a mask because they don't want to shave, or simple things like that. So sometimes there is a little bit of pushback, but health and safety really is just looking out for your best interests and trying to protect these workers and their workplaces. But I think the risk communication piece is really important, so that workers understand, sometimes you will have to wear a respirator.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, listen, I guess there's a lot there to consider. I suppose that it's tricky. It's always evolving, like even back in the day, like we never heard of silicosis. And all of a sudden that came on the scene when I was sort of out of the game. But, like who knows what's next? Like there's just always something popping up, isn't there?
Yeah, I know, it's true. I was watching a documentary the other day, and it was talking about how, back in the 60s, but they were showing old commercials with doctors smoking cigarettes, right? Like, we never know what the next thing is going to be. But I think hopefully in trades, people can just have awareness and really stop and take their time and consider what things could be in the building materials around them before they go and start impacting those materials and potentially exposing themselves and others.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you for your time. It's been an interesting conversation. I guess one that's never really going to go away, in truth, sadly. And if anyone, and I'll have some links on how people can get hold of you in the show notes over at Aura Health. So thank you for your time, and I'll let you get back to your winter wonderland.
Thank you so much, and I will be jealous of your 35-degree heat.
Trust me, you won't be jealous. It's 35-degree heat and 100% humidity. Is disgusting.
Okay, the humidity part I'm not so jealous about.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
All right, brilliant. Well, thanks for your time, Taryn. Chat soon.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Please, while you're here, subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Now listen, if you are a trade-based business and you work in projects, roofing, bathrooms, kitchen renovations, home renovations, solar installations, that kind of thing, we would love to be able to showcase you as our next success case. Insane return on ad spend over here. We're talking 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 13,000% return on ad spend week in, week out with some of our clients. And we would love to put you in that picture. So please head across to tradie.wiki/YT for YouTube. Tradie.wiki/YT for YouTube. I look forward to chatting to you soon. Enjoy the next episode and thank you for all your support.